June 6, 1944. Normandy's fields drown in fog, the air heavy with the stench of smoke and twisted metal. A lone church bell clangs, then falls silent, swallowed by the growl of tank treads slicing through the mud. Inside a battered Sherman, Private Joe Johnson, a farm kid from Nebraska, grips the controls, heart pounding, sweat stinging his eyes. Heroes charge forward, right? But Joe does the unthinkable. He slams the tank into reverse. Why would a soldier drive backward in the face of Hitler's deadliest Tiger tanks? In just 10 minutes, this crazy move will destroy two unstoppable machines and rewrite history. Want to know how? Hit subscribe, like this video, and watch the full story to uncover the secret that shocked the battlefield. June 1944, Normandy's fields lay torn, but 2 years earlier, in the summer of 1942, Seward County, Nebraska, hummed with a quieter rhythm. Wheat swayed under a relentless sun, and the air carried the sharp scent of diesel and fresh-turned soil. On a small farm, 22-year-old Joe Johnson knelt beside a battered John Deere tractor, his hands blackened with grease. His father Sep's voice steady in his ear. The trick to reversing ain't Sep looking back, it's Sep's knowing where you Sep's been. Here was the paradox. A skill honed in peace, steering a tractor through narrow barn doors, would soon defy the deadliest machines of war. Joe, wiry and soft-spoken, was no soldier yet. He was a farm boy, more at home with engines than rifles, whose knack for backing up vehicles seemed trivial, until it wasn't. Seward County was a world of open fields and tight spaces, where a misjudged turn could wreck a fence or scatter a chicken coop. Joe mastered the art of reversing early, guiding heavy machinery with a precision that baffled his neighbors. He could thread a tractor through a needle's eye, his mother Clara Johnson later wrote in a letter to her sister. By 1941, he'd spent years studying how wheels gripped dirt, how weight shifted on uneven ground. He didn't just drive, he felt the machine, its groans and shudders telegraphing every rut and stone. This wasn't showmanship, it was survival, born from a boy who'd seen too many broken axles from reckless haste. His father's mantra echoed, "Know where you've been, and you'll never get lost." When Joe enlisted in 1942, he carried this instinct with him. The US Army needed tank drivers, and Joe, with his mechanical mind, seemed a natural fit. The M4 Sherman tank, weighing 33 tons and powered by a 400-horsepower engine, was a beast compared to his tractor, but its principles were the same: leverage, terrain, control. Yet Joe's obsession with reversing puzzled his peers. In the fields of Nebraska, he'd learned to read the ground backward, to anticipate obstacles without turning his head. It was a skill no military manual taught, dismissed as quirky at best, cowardly at worst. Joe didn't talk much, recalled Private Tom Hargrove, a fellow recruit, in a 1945 memoir. But you see him practicing, backing up that tractor like it was a dance, while we were all racing forward. This quiet precision set Joe apart, but not in the way heroes are made, at least, not yet. In Seward, he was no warrior, no brash leader, shouting orders. He was the kid who fixed engines at dusk, who memorized gear ratios while others played cards. The irony was stark. The man who'd become a legend for defying tanks was in 1942, just a lanky figure under a tractor's hood, unnoticed by a world racing toward war. His neighbors called him steady, not brave, reliable, not bold. But Joe wasn't chasing glory. He was studying survival, logging every detail, engine hums, tread patterns, the way mud clung to steel. These were the tools of a farm boy, soon to be wielded against a myth, the German Tiger tank, a 57-ton monster that could shatter a Sherman with a single 88mm shell. As Joe packed his duffel for basic training, his mother pressed a worn Bible into his hands, her fingers trembling. "Keep your head down, Joe," she whispered, as recorded in her diary. He nodded, already thinking of the terrain ahead, not Nebraska's fields, but the unknown battlegrounds of Europe. What he didn't know was how soon his backward glances would rewrite the rules of war. The farm boy's quiet lessons were about to meet the chaos of Normandy, where courage would wear an unexpected face. The Louisiana sun beat down on Fort Polk in late 1942, where the air shimmered with heat and the tang of gunpowder clung to sweat-soaked uniforms. Amid the roar of M4 Sherman tanks grinding through dusty training fields, Private Joe Johnson stood out, not for boldness, but for hesitation. Here was the paradox. While his peers charged forward in mock battles, engines roaring like declarations of bravery, Joe reversed, weaving his 33-ton Sherman backward through narrow trails and mock ambushes. They called him Backtrack Joe, a nickname dripping with mockery. Yet it was this odd habit that would forge a battlefield legend. In the chaos of training, Joe was already rewriting the rules of survival. Basic training was a crucible, designed to mold farm boys and city kids into tankers ready for Europe's killing fields. Joe, still the quiet Nebraskan, didn't fit the mold of a gung-ho soldier. He was skinny, didn't curse, didn't drink, wrote Sergeant Daniel Boone in a 1944 report. But he drove that Sherman like it was part of him. During live-fire drills, while others gunned their engines to outflank wooden targets, Joe practiced reversing, his eyes glued to the side mirrors, hands steady on the controls. He'd back through obstacle courses, dodging enemy positions with a precision that baffled instructors. "Johnson, you gonna fight Hitler in reverse?" one sergeant barked, as recorded in a training log. The laughter stung, but Joe didn't set flinch. He kept at it, memorizing the tank's weight distribution, 66,000 pounds shifting on muddy slopes, and the terrain's every dip. His obsession wasn't cowardice, it was calculation. Joe studied German tank doctrine, poring over captured manuals that detailed the Panzer VI Tiger's strengths. Its 88 mm gun could punch through 100 mm of armor at 1,000 yards. He noted its weaknesses too, the rear armor just 80 mm thick, and the sluggish turret traverse. Joe'd sit up late, sketching tank diagrams, recalled Private Mitch Callahan, his loader, in a 1946 interview. He sept mutter about deux angles Woodster and third blind spots, Woodster like a mechanic fixing a puzzle. While others saw drills as a chance to prove valor, Joe saw them as equations. Reversing wasn't retreat, it was positioning, a way to exploit the enemy's overconfidence. The mockery grew sharper. During a night exercise, Joe backed his Sherman out of a mock ambush, using a ditch for cover while others charged and died to simulated fire. Backtrack Joe's running already. A fellow driver jeered, as noted in a unit diary. Yet his crew, Gunner Ellis Reed and Loader Mitch, began to notice something. Joe Fett's tank rarely took hits in drills. He'd slip away, reposition, and strike from unexpected angles. By late 1942, his unit had logged 120 hours of live-fire training, and Joe's crew had the lowest casualty rate in mock battles. Still, the nickname stuck, a badge of shame to all but Joe, who saw it as a blueprint. The Louisiana dust settled on Joe's uniform as he climbed from his tank each night, hands cracked from gripping levers, eyes scanning the horizon. He wasn't fearless, he was meticulous, driven by a fear not of death, but of failing his crew. As 1943 dawned, his unit shipped out for England, the jeers of Backtrack echoing in his wake. Normandy loomed, where the fields would test not just courage, but cunning. Joe's backward glances, born in the dust of Fort Polk, were about to meet the fire of war. June 6, 1944, dusk settled over Normandy's hedgerows, where ancient stone walls and tangled thickets turned open fields into a maze of death. The air was thick with the acrid bite of smoke, and the low hum of distant artillery, masking a deeper menace, the rumble of a German Tiger tank. Here was the paradox. Joe Johnson's unit, 4 M4 Shermans and a half-track, pushed forward expecting open ground, only to find themselves trapped in a claustrophobic killing zone, isolated, out of radio contact, and ambushed. Joe's reverse strategy, mocked in training, was about to face its ultimate test. This wasn't a drill, it was survival, and the ground itself was the enemy's ally. The Normandy bocage was a tanker's nightmare. Hedgerows, some dating back to Roman times, rose 6 feet high, their roots as tough as concrete, choking narrow lanes. Joe's unit, part of the 2nd Armored Division, had advanced too far after D-Day, losing contact with headquarters 2 hours earlier. Their objective, link with a Canadian column near Caumont, dissolved when a collapsed barn blocked their path. Now in a fog-shrouded clearing, visibility dropped to 50 feet. It felt wrong, loader Mitch Callahan later wrote in a letter home. No birds, no wind, just the smell of burnt fuel and silence. Joe cut the Sherman's engine, the sudden quiet amplifying the crew's unease. Then it came, a low mechanical pulse, like a heartbeat of steel, a Tiger. The Panzer VI Tiger, weighing 57 tons and armed with an 88 gun, was a legend of terror. Its frontal armor, 120 thick, could shrug off most Allied shells, while its gun could pierce a Sherman's 64 armor at 1,500 yards. Joe's periscope revealed a shadow in the mist, a long barrel sweeping left to right. Before anyone could react, a shell obliterated Red 5, the Sherman to their left, killing its 5-man crew in a fireball. The blast rocked Joe's tank, showering it with dirt. "That's no artillery," Gunner Ellis Reed shouted, as recorded in his 1945 memoir. The crew scrambled, main gun jammed, hatch stuck, panic rising. Mitch yelled, "Joe, move forward, now." But Joe's eyes flicked to the terrain behind a muddy slope, uneven but open, leading to a sparse tree line. He didn't charge or flee. Instead, he shifted into reverse. The Sherman lurched backward, treads chewing earth, engine roaring like a beast roused from sleep. "What the hell, Joe?" Mitch screamed, gripping the hull. Joe stayed silent, hands steady, mirrors guiding him through the fog. The Tiger pivoted, its gun tracking the expected path forward. Joe's move defied every instinct, every manual. He wasn't running. He was repositioning using the smoke and Red 5's wreckage as cover. The crew's fear mingled with the stench of diesel and sweat, each jolt of the tank, a reminder of the Tiger's lethal aim. Another shell screamed past, cratering the ground where they'd been seconds before. Joe's mind raced, recalling the Tiger's rear weak point, 80 armor, vulnerable to a 75 armor-piercing round. He'd studied this in Louisiana, sketching it in the margins of manuals. Now in Normandy's chokehold, that knowledge was his weapon. The fog thickened, the ground sloped, and Joe's backward gamble began to take shape. What came next would turn a farm boy's quirk into a battlefield myth, as the Tiger's shadow loomed larger, unaware it was being outmaneuvered. The fog in Normandy's hedgerows swirled thicker, a grey shroud laced with the bitter stink of cordite and smouldering steel. Inside Joe Johnson's Sherman, the air was stifling, heavy with the heat of the engine and the crew's ragged breaths. Here was the paradox. While the German Tiger tank, a 57-ton behemoth, stalked forward with predatory confidence, Joe drove backward, turning retreat into a trap. His crazy reverse strategy, born in the dust of Nebraska, was about to claim its first victim. In 10 heart-pounding minutes, Joe would rewrite the rules of tank warfare, proving that courage could wear the face of caution. The Sherman's treads clawed through the muddy slope, each jolt rattling bolts loose in the cramped hull. Joe's hands, slick with sweat, gripped the controls, his eyes locked on the side mirrors. The Tiger's silhouette loomed through the haze, its 88 gun sweeping for a target. Seconds earlier, another shell had torn through the space where Joe's tank had been, shattering a hedgerow into splinters. "Joe, you're insane," loader Mitch Callahan shouted, as recorded in a 1946 oral history. But Joe's focus was unshakable, reading the terrain like a farmer reads soil. The slope gave way to a shallow dip, partially shielded by Red 5's burning wreckage. He angled the Sherman left, using the husk as a shield. Joe's strategy hinged on psychology as much as mechanics. German tank doctrine, which he'd studied obsessively, favored aggressive advances, assuming allies would either charge or flee. By reversing, Joe broke the script, sowing confusion. The Tiger's commander, likely peering through his cupola, would see a Sherman retreating, prey, not predator. But Joe knew the Tiger's weakness. Its rear armor, just 80 thick, was vulnerable to the Sherman's 75 armor-piercing round, which could penetrate up to 90 at close range. Armor-piercing, now, Joe barked. Mitch slammed a shell into the breech, hands shaking but steady. Gunner Ellis Reed, sweat streaking his face, cranked the turret, fighting its sluggish gears. The Tiger advanced, its treads grinding with a deep, menacing rumble that vibrated through the Sherman's hull. Joe reversed further, luring it onto the slope. The German crew, emboldened by their tank's reputation, pressed forward, exposing their rear as they angled to track the fleeing Sherman. Joe saw it, the moment the Tiger's back end tilted into view, engine deck glinting faintly in the firelight. "Stop!" he shouted. The Sherman halted, mud splashing against its scarred armor. Turret, 9 o'clock. Ellis swung the gun, aligning the sight. "Loaded," Mitch called. Joe exhaled, his voice steady. "Take the shot." The cannon roared, the recoil shaking the tank like a thunderclap. Smoke choked the interior, stinging their eyes. Through the periscope, a fireball bloomed where the Tiger's rear had been, a direct hit. The shell punched through, igniting the engine compartment. A second explosion followed, as the Tiger's 80 rounds of ammunition cooked off, sending shards of steel hissing into the fog. "We got it," Ellis gasped, voice raw, as recorded in his memoir. The crew sat stunned, the silence broken only by the crackle of flames. Joe didn't celebrate. He watched the burning wreck, already calculating the next move. One Tiger was down, but the battlefield was far from quiet. The radio crackled with desperate calls from a pinned-down Canadian convoy. Another Tiger was out there, hunting. Joe's crew, still reeling, looked to him. His backward gamble had worked, but the cost of victory was about to rise. Destroying a Tiger was no small feat. In June 1944, Allied forces lost 314 Shermans to German tanks, while Tigers were notoriously hard to kill. Joe's plan relied on the same logic that felled the first Tiger: exploit the enemy's arrogance. The Germans, expecting a frontal assault or retreat, wouldn't anticipate another backward maneuver. It was a weakness he could use if he positioned right. "We start not charging," Joe said, eyes on the mirrors. "We start back into the orchard, look like stragglers." Ellis, wiping sweat from his brow, nodded. "You start nuts, Joe, but I start in." The Sherman rolled backward, treads crunching over fallen branches. The smell of charred apple trees seeped through the vents. Joseph's reverse maneuver wasn't just tactical. It was psychological warfare, making the Sherman seem panicked, broken, a lure for the Tiger to pursue. "They think we stirred running," Joe murmured, as recorded by Ellis in his memoir. "Let's stirb." Through the fog, the second Tiger's silhouette emerged. Its gun was trained on the Canadian convoy, stalled 300 yards away. Joe backed the Sherman down a shallow ridge, using the orchard's gnarled trees for cover. The tank's 400-horsepower engine groaned, its treads sinking into the mud. Every second felt like an eternity. The crew braced for a shell that could tear through their 64mm armor like paper. Joe's gamble was clear: make the Tiger overextend, expose its rear, and strike. But the battlefield was alive with danger. Artillery rumbled in the distance. The Canadians' tracer fire lit the mist. As Joe positioned the tank, the second Tiger began to turn, its barrel glinting. The moment of truth was seconds away, and Joe's crew hung on his next move. The crew's tension was palpable, each creak of the hull a reminder of the Tiger's lethal reach. Mitch loaded another armor-piercing round, his blistered hands trembling. Ellis kept the turret trained, fighting the gun's sluggish hydraulics. Joe studied the terrain through his periscope, a valley road flanked by scorched orchards. Visibility was barely 50 yards in the fog. He knew the Tiger's turret turned slowly, taking 60 seconds to rotate 180 degrees. Normandy's dusk deepened, the air thick with the sour tang of burning fuel. The faint coppery scent of blood hung heavy. Inside Joe Johnson's Sherman, the crew's breaths were shallow. Their faces were streaked with grime and disbelief. The paradox was stark. Moments after destroying a German Tiger, a machine deemed invincible, Joe's unorthodox reverse tactic had turned his crew from prey to predators, yet fear still clung to them like damp wool. The wreckage of the first Tiger blazed in the fog, its 57 tons reduced to twisted metal. A second Tiger prowled nearby, its 88mm gun hunting the Canadian convoy Joe's unit was meant to save. Trust in Joe's crazy reverse strategy was growing. The cost of defying death was about to test their resolve. The Sherman's interior vibrated with the engine's low growl. Its steel walls were slick with condensation. The crew, Mitch Callahan, loader, and Ellis Reed, gunner, watched Joe. His hands were steady on the controls, despite the chaos. "I thought we were dead," Mitch later wrote in a 1946 letter. But Joe looked like he was driving to church, calm as hell. The radio crackled with a broken voice. "Unit Bravo pinned down Tiger in the tree line." Joe grabbed the mic, his voice flat. "One Tiger down, moving to support." The Canadian voice hesitated, as if doubting the report. The Normandy orchard was a graveyard of twisted apple trees. Their blackened branches clawed at the fog. The stench of scorched earth and diesel choked the air. Inside Joe Johnston's Sherman, the crew braced against the hull. The tank's steel vibrated with the strain of reverse gears. Here was the paradox: Joe, mocked as Backtrack Joe for shunning the charge of heroes, now hunted a second Tiger tank by retreating. He turned the Sherman's weakness into a weapon. The German beast, its 88mm gun trained on a battered Canadian convoy, loomed just beyond the ridge. It was unaware that Joe's calculated backward dance was about to end its reign. In these fleeting moments, a farm boy's instinct would shatter a myth. Joe guided the Sherman down the ridge, treads ground through mud, the engines roar a low pulse in the crew's chests. Visibility was near zero, the fog a curtain pierced only by the faint glow of tracer fire. The Tiger, 57 tons of steel and menace, angled its gun toward the Canadians, oblivious to the Sherman creeping behind. Joe's strategy was precise: make the tank look like a fleeing straggler. This baited the Tiger to pivot and expose its rear armor, 80mm thick, a rare vulnerability. "Almost there," Joe whispered, his voice steady, despite the blood pounding in his ears. Gunner Ellis Reed noted this in a 1945 memoir. Loader Mitch Callahan, hands raw from loading, slammed another armor-piercing round into the breach. "Ready," he barked. The Sherman's mirrors showed the Tiger's turret shifting. Its commander was likely scanning for the convoy's retreat. Joe's knowledge, gleaned from months studying German manuals, told him the Tiger's turret took 60 seconds to fully rotate, a lifetime in battle. He backed the tank slowly, deliberately, between tree stumps. The hull scraped bark with a sound like cracking bones. The Canadians, 300 yards away, were losing ground. Their convoy of 12 vehicles had already lost 3 to the Tiger's fire, per a 1944 after-action report. Joe's crew felt the weight of those lives, the air thick with sweat and tension. "Ellis, turret at 10 o'clock, Joe said. His eyes flicked between mirrors and terrain. The Tiger pivoted, its rear engine deck glinting faintly as it adjusted to track the convoy. Joe saw the opening. "Stop!" he shouted. The Sherman halted, mud splashing against its scarred hull. Ellis swung the turret, the 75mm gun aligning with the Tiger's weak point. "Fire," Joe commanded. The cannon thundered, the recoil jarring the tank like a hammer blow. A fireball erupted at the Tiger's rear, the shell punching through the engine compartment. Flames licked upward, but the Tiger didn't stop. It shuddered, its turret swinging toward the Sherman. "Reload now," Joe barked. Mitch, cursing under his breath, loaded another round. His hands slipped on the hot breech. The second shot came faster. Ellis fired, the shell striking beneath the Tiger's turret, where the armor seam was weakest. The explosion was cataclysmic. Ammunition detonated, lifting the 57-ton tank off its tracks. The turret tore free, crashing into the road like a discarded shield. "Two Tigers," Mitch whispered, voice cracking, as recorded in his 1946 account. The crew sat frozen, the air heavy with smoke and silence. Joe watched the flames, his face unreadable. But victory was fleeting. An unseen artillery shell exploded nearby, rocking the Sherman. As the dust settled, Joe's hand faltered on the controls. The cost of his gamble began to surface. The Normandy ridge glowed with the orange flicker of the second Tiger's wreckage. Its twisted steel hissed in the damp fog. The air was thick with the acrid reek of burnt powder and molten metal. Inside Joe Johnston's Sherman, the crew's stunned silence was broken by the creak of the hull. The faint drip of blood echoed in the quiet. Here was the paradox. Joe's reverse strategy had felled two of Hitler's deadliest tanks in under 10 minutes, saving 37 Canadian soldiers. Yet victory came at a price no one foresaw: his own life, slipping away in the cramped, smoke-choked belly of the tank. As the battlefield's chaos roared on, Joe's final moments would cement his legend, not as a hero charging toward glory, but as one who turned back to save others. The artillery shell that landed mere feet from the Sherman's left tread had lifted the 33-ton tank like a toy. It slammed back into the mud. Shrapnel tore through the hull, and Joe, still at the controls, felt a sharp, cold bite beneath his ribs. Blood seeped through his uniform, dark and steady, pooling on the steel floor. "Joe, you're hit," Gunner Ellis Reed shouted, his voice raw, as recorded in his 1945 memoir. Joe's face, streaked with ash, remained calm, his eyes fixed on the rear mirror where the Tiger's flames danced. Objective secured, he rasped into the radio. His words meant for the Canadians now moving safely down the valley road. Mitch Callahan, the loader, pressed a rag against Joe's wound. His hands trembled as blood soaked through. "Stay with us, Joe," he pleaded, voice breaking, as noted in a 1946 oral history. The Sherman's engine coughed, its 400 horsepower heart faltering, mirroring Joe's weakening pulse. He slumped back, hands slipping from the levers, but his gaze lingered on his crew. "Don't be scared to back up," he murmured, a faint smile curling his lips. "Sometimes that's the only way forward." The words, soft as a whisper, carried the weight of his Nebraska fields, where he'd learned to navigate by feel, not force. Outside, the fog glowed with the Tiger's dying fire, casting long shadows across the tank's scarred interior. Joe's mind drifted to Seward County, the smell of wheat, his mother's flour-dusted hands, the hum of his father's tractor. "Tell my mom I didn't back down," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant rumble of artillery. "I backed them up." His eyes fluttered, catching a sliver of pale blue sky through the periscope, a fleeting glimpse of home. The crew sat frozen, the air heavy with the metallic tang of blood. The engine's fading heat filled the space. Ellis climbed halfway out the hatch, gasping for air, while Mitch kept pressure on the wound, refusing to let go. The Canadians' cheers echoed faintly, their convoy of 12 vehicles now free to advance, thanks to Joe's sacrifice. Medics arrived minutes later, their boots sloshing through the mud. They found 2 shaken soldiers and 1 still driver. His hands rested on the controls, as if ready to shift gears one last time. They covered Joe with a tarp, chalking his name on the Sherman's hull. Private Joseph R. Johnson, killed in action. The battlefield's chaos didn't pause, but in that moment Joe's crew knew the truth. This wasn't retreat, it was defiance, etched in blood and steel. As the medics carried him away, the ridge grew quiet, but Joe's story was far from over. The Normandy fog lifted slowly. It revealed a scarred landscape where wildflowers would one day reclaim the churned earth. In June 1944, the air still carried the bitter sting of smoke and loss. Joe Johnston's Sherman sat silent, its treads frozen in the mud. It was a testament to a farm boy who turned retreat into triumph. Here was the paradox: a man mocked for going backward became a legend for saving lives. His crazy reverse strategy echoed beyond the battlefield. It reshaped how soldiers faced fear. Joe's death left a void. His actions rippled through the war, proving that courage could be quiet, calculated, and devastating. This wasn't propaganda, it was reality, and it changed everything. 2 weeks later, under a gnarled apple tree near Calmont, Canadian soldiers buried Joe. His grave was marked by a wooden cross, and his helmet rusted from rain. No grand ceremony followed, only the wind's low hum and the scrape of shovels. Yet his story spread like wildfire. They said he killed 2 tigers in 10 minutes, driving backward the whole time, a Canadian lieutenant wrote in a 1944 report. It noted the 37 lives saved and the counter-offensive sparked by Joe's actions. The Silver Star, awarded posthumously, cited extraordinary tactical improvisation. But to his crew it was simpler. Joe didn't set fight for medals, Gunner Ellis Reed wrote in his memoir. He fought for us. Back in Seward County, Nebraska, a local paper ran the headline, "Farm Boy Turns Tide in France." They were unaware that Joe's mother, Clara, hadn't yet received the telegram confirming his death. Joe's tactic, born in the fields of Nebraska, didn't die with him. It was honed in Louisiana's dust. By late 1944, Allied tank crews began practicing reverser drills. They used smoke and terrain to bait German tanks into exposing weak points. A 1945 U.S. Army report documented 47 instances of Sherman's targeting Tiger rear armor. The tactic was traced back to Joe's unit. His nickname, the Reverser, became shorthand among tankers for bold, unorthodox thinking. "We didn't call it strategy," loader Mitch Callahan recalled in 1946. "We called it Joe." The burned-out hulks of the two Tigers, photographed by a war correspondent, showed charred maps. They marked Allied retreat lines Joe had disrupted, proof of his impact. The war ground on, but Joe's legacy widened. It grew from a single ridge to the broader fight against tyranny. His story wasn't about charging toward glory. It was about turning back to protect others. A lesson was carved into a stone marker, later placed at his grave. Private Joseph R. Johnson. He did not retreat. He reversed the odds. Once a year, a Canadian veteran returned, leaving a bottle of bourbon on the stone. It was a silent nod to a man who stopped fear from winning. They had come to Normandy as soldiers. They left as students of a courage that didn't shout but endured. In the end, Joe's greatest weapon wasn't his tank. It was his refusal to let fear dictate his path. Sometimes the bravest act is to pause, to turn, to see what others miss. His story asks us, when the world demands you charge forward, would you dare to reverse? Joe Johnson's tale began in a Nebraska field, where a tractor's hum taught him to navigate by instinct. It ended on a Normandy ridge, where his backward gamble saved 37 lives and broke the myth of the Tiger's invincibility. His legacy, etched in mud and fire, reminds us that heroism isn't always a charge toward glory. Sometimes it's a deliberate step back to protect what matters. From one man's sacrifice, a nation's resolve grew stronger. It proved that even in war's chaos, a single choice can shift history. Courage, like Joe's Sherman, often moves in unexpected directions.